Your Humanities Half Hour is brought to you by the Northern Marianas Humanities Council, navigating the human experience together.
Hafade Tiro, and welcome to Your Humanities Half Hour. I'm Catherine Perry, and today we're exploring a part of Marianas history from the Japanese administrative era related to religion. And here to chat with us is Professor Michihiro Ama. He's Dean of International Studies under the Department of International Studies at Otani University in Kyoto, Japan. That's a long title. He's come a short way to join us. Professor Ama, welcome.
Well, good morning, and thank you for inviting me to your show. And if it's okay with you, first of all, I would like to thank Mr. Scott Russell, a former historic office historic preservation officer of CNMI for helping my research and setting up this interview.
A lot of people know Scott. They know that he knows a lot. So thank you, Scott. Tell us a little bit more about your area of expertise and what brings you to our islands.
Right. So I specialize in the history of modern Japanese Buddhism, especially in Trans-Pacific context, as the Japanese Buddhism advanced to Hawaii and the North American continent. So I'm here today because my interest kind of stretches to the south of the Pacific, and I'm tracing footsteps of two particular Japanese Buddhist ministers and indigenous people who interacted with them.
What was happening in Japan in the late 1800s that caused them to want to spread Buddhism more, not only to the Marianas and South Seas, but as you mentioned, Asia, North America? What was going on inside Japan?
Right. So Japan opened up to the West in the mid-19th century. So after the Meiji Restoration of 1868. And Japan gradually emerged as a world power, and especially after the Russo-Japanese War, Japan became a world power and be able to compete with powerful Western nations. And as a result of that, Japan colonized various parts of Asia, the Empire of Japan, certainly the Korean Peninsula, Taiwan, and eventually northeast part of China, which the Empire of Japan called Manchuria. So basically, Japanese Buddhist sects and denominations, they were part of the state apparatus of the Empire of Japan. So because Japanese people migrated to various parts of Asia, Japanese Buddhist organizations sent their ministers to those places to meet the spiritual needs of Japanese migrants, and especially take care of funerals. Buddhist funerals, what we call funerary Buddhism, was tied to ancestor worship, which was main component of Japanese culture. But if you look at east from Japan, Japanese Buddhism also advanced to Hawaii and North American continent, particularly west coast states of the United States and Canada, because the king of Republic of Hawaii came to Japan during the Meiji era and wanted to have Japanese people work at the sugar plantations. So that's when Japanese migration to Hawaii started, and migration to Hawaii and North American continent continued until the Immigration Act of 1924. So again, the Buddhist organizations follow the pattern of Japanese immigration to Hawaii, and they went to Hawaii and West Coast states of America, and they built many Buddhist propagation centers. First and foremost for Japanese migrants, but they also eventually began to promote Buddhism to Euro-Americans. Yeah, and they, of course, advanced to South Sea Islands.
What did that expansion look like here in the Marianas? I was surprised to learn there were actually many Buddhist shrines that were built.
Right. What I understand, so this is from what I understood from the books written in Japanese, was that Imperial Japanese Navy advanced to the South Sea Islands right after the World War I broke out. The Empire of Japan took Anglo-Japanese treaty as a pretext to remove Germans from the South Sea Islands. And that was 1914, and up until the League of Nations was formed, and the Empire of Japan was given the Class C, was given permit to govern the South Sea Islands with the Class C mandate system. Basically, Imperial Japanese Army seized Micronesia north of the equator. And during that era, already Japanese Buddhist priests, some of them came to the South Sea Islands. And particularly Reverend Kobayashi, who later built Saipan Honganji, came to Saipan in 1919, I think. And eventually he built or upgraded the propagation center to the temple structure in 1930.
So what structures were built in the islands, Saipan, Tini, and Rota?
So first of all, you kind of need to differentiate between Buddhist temples and Shinto shrines. So, and my research, I'm interested in the development of Buddhist temples in South Sea Islands, because a couple of Japanese scholars have already done research on Japanese Shinto shrines built in the South Sea Islands. But as far as Saipan is concerned, there are two major Buddhist temples. One is Saipan Honganji, and the other one is Nanyoji. Right.
What can you tell us about where they were located, and if any remains are still there today?
Sure. So Saipan Honganji was built in South Garapan, across the street from where a Japanese jail stands. And the day before yesterday, Miss Genevieve Cabrera took me to the Saipan Higashi Honganji site. And there are some entrance stone structures. The lower portions of the cement still exist. But they were foundations, but they were covered with dense shrubs. So I can't really see whether anything was inscribed in it or not. And at the cross section, there's also a pole in which you see the symbol of lotus flower was inscribed, but again it was in the dense covered with shrubs, so I couldn't really see it.
And this is across from the Japanese jail.
Yeah, Japanese jail. Okay. Yeah. And currently people live there, so I can't really go inside and do cut the shrubs and do some research. I cannot do that. So yeah, and the other one, Nanyoji, is built in northern Garapan, and actually very close to Micro Beach. And even today there is a monument saying Nanyoji once stood, I think, right behind the Crown Plaza Hotel.
Kind of like when you're going to take that right-hand
Right.
turn, it's like an L,
Right.
and there's a pillar there. Right, okay.
Yeah, that's where
Right,
it
south,
is.
okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Was it common at those times? Of course, Garapan was the main town at that time. Was it common for shrines to be located next to schools? Because I understand there was also a school at the Crown Plaza site.
Right.
Or not necessarily.
I think so. The Shinto shrines, they were sometimes built in the city, but they are also built in the hills and the kind of mountains. But Buddhist temples were built in the city, and both they're not connected to a public school. I don't think Japanese public school, but both Saipan Honganji and Nanyoji promoted Japanese style education, and also they built schools for indigenous people, and especially Saipan Honganji built a school for Saipanese female children where they learned sewing, modern cooking, tea ceremony, public health, and etc. that the Japanese teenage girls, would learn back in Japan. So.
Oh, so if I understood you correctly, the temple built a school for local young ladies to learn these
that's
skills.
In the case of Nanyoji. But as I said, Saipan Honganji also built a school for Carolinians, I think. Yeah, but I don't know where that was built. There's no information in it. And eventually, I think Nanyocho, the South Seas government, built their own schools primarily for Japanese kids, but also I think they built schools for indigenous people as well.
So at that time, of course, there were predominantly Japanese. That was the main population, the indigenous Chamorros and Carolinians, and then you had the Okinawans and the Koreans. What kind of other activities were going on at the shrines, and did all of these groups participate, like if it was a religious ceremony, or was it mostly the Japanese, the Korean, Okinawa? How much?
Yeah, I think it's primarily so those who participated in Japanese Buddhist practice were Japanese migrants from the mainland Japanese and Okinawans. And because, as I said, they value ancestor worship and Japanese funerary Buddhism, which consists of visual service and death rituals and periodical memorial services to honor the ancestors. So because of that, they came to the Buddhist temples basically to honor their ancestors. And at the same time, of course, Japanese Buddhist ministers, I believe they taught Buddhist teachings to them. And I don't know to what extent they reached the Japanese. Well, I knew some in terms of Aoyagi's activities and Kobayashi's activities, but because of there's language barriers, and unless the indigenous people learned and be able to speak Japanese, I don't think Japanese Buddhist leaders were unable to really explain Buddhist teachings to them. But some indigenous people did participate in Japanese Buddhist practice. And I can briefly share one episode that I found in Japanese religious newspaper articles. Back then, there was a young Carolinian who had moved to Saipan from Koror in the present-day Republic of Palau, and he died at the age of 22 in Saipan. And he wished his funeral to be held in a traditional Buddhist style. So Reverend Kobayashi of Saipan Honganji and Assistant Buddhist Minister officiated at his funeral, to which Carolinian chiefs and many other Carolinians attended. So I don't know if this is a separate incident or other Carolinians wanted to have their funerals done in a Buddhist style. I don't know. But it seems to me that for Kobayashi, probably the success of Japanese propagation of Japanese Buddhism to the indigenous people was measured by the indigenous people's acceptance of this funerary practice. And in fact, Kobayashi was the caretaker of the both Japanese cemetery and indigenous people's cemetery in South Garapan. So that tells us something. But again, we don't know anything else, other than that.
Sorry, did you say he was the priest was Kobayashi was the
Saipan Honganji.
Honganji?
Mm-hmm.
He was the caretaker for both the Buddhist cemetery and the indigenous people's cemetery.
Right, yeah, in South Garapan. Yeah,
and I think that's somewhere along Beach Road. If
yeah,
I'm
I
not mistaken,
believe
on
so.
Beach Road.
I believe so.
Southern Garapan. Yes. Okay. So there was. It seems that it was acceptable if the indigenous people chose to accept Buddhism or not, which most of them didn't, but it seemed that either way was fine with the Japanese administration.
I think so, yeah. I mean, it's just from the Japanese Buddhist organization's point of interest that they want to promote Buddhism to them. But as far as the Japanese administration, the Nanyocho, the South Seas government is concerned, their ultimate goal, objective was to promote state Shinto, right, eventually. And what was interesting back then was that, in the mid 19th century, when Japan opened up to the West, Japanese leaders had to come up with word to translate religion. Actually, that was from German word. And they came up with the Japanese word, shukyo. But shukyo suggested basically organized religions such as Christianity, Buddhism, and other types of belief systems. And in this category of religion, Shinto was not really included because eventually Shinto became associated with imperial, state Shinto, based on the worshiping a Japanese emperor. And that practice was seen as a kind of imperial tradition that subjects of the Empire of Japan were ought to observe. So therefore, that applied to the South Sea Islands, and then the South Sea government probably didn't care whether the indigenous people are Catholics or they or converted to Buddhism or not, as long as they go to the state shrine, in the case of Saipan Catholic Shrine, to bow and honor the Japanese emperor.
Well, you have more stories related to locals in the context of this.
Yes.
When we come back after the break, we'll take a look also at some photos that Professor Ama has brought. We'll be back after this.
Looking for resources about Marianas history, culture, and more? Well, check out the Northern Marianas Humanities Council's collection. Our extensive video, audio, and photographic library can be found on YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram at 670 Humanities. Or check out the written resources on our website at nmhcouncil.org. And for those who prefer a good book, we also have a selection of local publications for purchase. So, dive in, explore, and share your comments as we navigate the human experience together.
Welcome back. We are chatting with Professor Michihiro Ama of Otani University, Department of International Studies in Kyoto, Japan. Professor Ama, you have found documentation of actually some strong personal relationships and friendships that were formed between the Buddhist priests and
Sure.
local families. What have you discovered about that?
Right, I can talk about two separate episodes. The first one is Reverend Aoyagi of Nanyoji took 6 young Chamorros to the second Pan-Pacific Conference of Young Buddhist Associations held in Tokyo in 1932. And this event was organized by primarily Japanese and also Japanese Americans in Hawaii and California. But over 1,000 Buddhists participated in this event, and invitation was extended to Asian people, in dignitaries in Asia, such as India, Sri Lanka, Thailand, China, and the invitation was also extended to the South Sea Islands. So Aoyagi took those 6 young Chamorros to experience modern Japanese civilization. Aoyagi did not really think it was realistic to introduce Buddhism to them directly. So instead, introducing modern Japanese civilization to the young Chamorros was more important to introducing them Buddhism. So anyway, so they went to Japan and they attended the Buddhist conference, and their visit was featured in a Japanese Buddhist journal called Daihorin, which I would translate as something like the large wheel of the Dharma. Okay, the very first volume. And so that journal covered the visits of the 6 Chamorros and included their interviews.
Can you tell us, and I know who those Chamorros were?
Right. So if you look at this photo, okay, in the first row, from right to left, there's a Japanese person, and then you have Andres Adalig, Philip Mendiola, Bonifacio Esteves, Anselmo Iglesias, and the Buddhist minister Aoyagi. And in the second row, from right to left, there are 2 individuals standing between the trees, and they are Francisco Sablan and Manuel Sablan. And Philip Mendiola went there as a translator. He worked at the Nanyo Kohatsu, the South Seas development company, and he was very fluent in Japanese. And there is a book written on his life by a Japanese journalist. But anyway, during the interview, those 6 Chamorros basically said they were really impressed by the modern civilization of the Empire of Japan. And they are also impressed by Buddhism as a lived religion. And they visited various places, and they were impressed by the sizes of Japanese temple compounds. And they visited one of the gigantic statues of a sitting Buddha in Kamakura, something like 36 feet high. So they really felt that Buddhism was deeply rooted in Japanese culture. And one of them, I think Anselmo, said during the interview that his father's generations, right, would never understand Buddhism because they are Catholics. But hopefully their generations, younger generations, would someday be able to understand and accept Buddhism. And in fact, Anselmo did say that he became more interested in Buddhism after coming to Japan. And in fact, this is really interesting part. Scott helped me to hook up with grandson of Anselmo Iglesias, Mariano. So the day before yesterday, I met him, and he shared his memories of his grandfather with me. So that was very interesting.
It's amazing that you have been able to find these photos and bring them to our community. And you actually have a couple more. Can you tell us what they are?
Right. So there's an image of Reverend Aoyagi and indigenous family. And I obtained this photo from Reverend Fukushima in Japan. He was a nephew of Aoyagi, and he was kind enough to show me this photo, which I'm sharing with right now. So if you look at this photo, you can see Aoyagi smiling with a man who appears to be a chief of indigenous tribe and his family. We don't know anything about this person, but we kind of talked about it, and he may be a Carolinian chief, but he may not be from Saipan, but he may be from Yap, because Aoyagi also built a Buddhist propagation center in Yap, and some indigenous chief was kind enough to give him his piece of land where he built a Buddhist propagation center in Yap. So,
are you aware if any shrines or temples were built in the tiny outer islands of Yap, the Caroline Islands?
Right. I think all I know is that Japanese Buddhist organization advanced to Yap, Pohnpei, and Palau. And in Truk Islands. That's pretty much all I know. Okay. But let me go back to Aoyagi, because he was quite a unique Japanese Buddhist minister. He not only got along with the indigenous people, but during the interview he said he was very bothered by the mainland Japanese migrants who often look down on the indigenous people. So he advocated for what we call today the indigenous people's human rights. And he had amicable relationships with indigenous people. And because of that, he was respected by those 6 chamorros who went to Japan with him for the Second Pan-Pacific Conference. Yeah.
Did you have one more photo you wanted to?
No, I think that's about it. The first photo of the journal was the depiction of people, including Japanese and Japanese, getting together. But it's hard to say who is sitting where. So yeah, the second photo that I explained is better.
Okay. We really want to thank you, number one, for bringing this part of our history back to our community. I'm sure families have may not have any photo of these 6 individuals that you've mentioned. So thank you for that. Is there anything the local community can do to help you? And do you have any final thoughts before we go?
So, once I started this research, I have more questions than answers, right? For instance, I know those 6 chamorros, and by the way, they are given Japanese names, and except for Anselmo Iglesias and Philip Mendiora, I don't know anything about other 4 young chamorros. And also there is a story, interesting episode that I would like to share with you. That is Reverend Kobayashi of Saipan Honganji adopted youngest brother of Philip Mendiora. Philip Mendiora later became a mayor of Tenyan from 1978 to 1982. And then his youngest brother, Batmel, he was adopted by Kobayashi, and he was sent to Japan to study perhaps Buddhism or just to receive Japanese education in general. And Batmel was 12 years old at that time, but we don't know anything about his relationship to Kobayashi in Japan. And he was conscripted when the war broke out. He fought in Burma, and after the war he returned to Saipan, and he moved to Guam where he died. But again, we don't know anything about Batmel Camacho Mendiora, who was adopted by Reverend Kobayashi. and stayed in Japan. And actually, for that matter, we don't know much about Reverend Kobayashi and his life. So if some of the audience knew about Saipan Honganji or Nanyoji, any episodes, any stories related to these places, maybe what your grandparents told you, then I'm happy to listen to. And if you have some photos, images, I would love to take a look at. So as I said, once I started this research, I have more questions than answers. And the South Sea Islands that the Empire of Japan occupied are huge, right? From the Palau to the Northern Mariana Islands. So we can't really generalize indigenous people's experience of Buddhism, and we need to examine their experiences of Buddhism case by case. And so that's a kind of very difficult task ahead of me, but I hope somehow I'm able to find a way to deal with what I'm tasked with. And Reverend Aoyagi and Reverend Kobayashi and their relationships to the indigenous people is really the first step for me to move forward.
Thank you again. Any final thoughts before we go?
Well, this is very interesting experience in Saipan, and as I said, Miss Cabrera showed me around in Saipan and Japan, the places related to the Japan era, and in Tenyan, I visited the places where Tenyan Honganji and Shunkaiji, both Japanese Buddhist temples, once stood, and visited crematorium from the Japan era and the scars of the Pacific War. That was really visceral experience for me. So I'm happy that I have come here, and I still need to do some work at HPO this afternoon, hopefully to dig out some information about Saipan Honganji, because they did their preservation work some time ago on Saipan Honganji site. So there's still a lot to do, but I'm happy that I came here for my research. Thank you.
And we're happy too. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Yes, our pleasure. Our guest today has been Professor Michihiro Ama. He's the Dean of the Faculty of International Studies under the Department of International Studies at Otani University in Kyoto, Japan, sharing about the history of Buddhism in the Marianas during the Japanese administrative era. If you have any information related to what he shared today or the people that he's mentioned, you can reach out to us and we'll put you in touch with him. This has been Your Humanities Half Hour. I'm Catherine Perry.
Your Humanities Half Hour has been made possible in part by a major grant from the National Endowment for the Humanities. Democracy demands wisdom. Any views, findings, conclusions, or recommendations expressed in this program do not necessarily represent those of the National Endowment for the Humanities. For more information or to share your thoughts, contact the Northern Marianas Humanities Council at nmhcouncil.org or on social media at 670 Humanities. That's 670 Humanities.